point does your application become legacy?
So there's a definition of legacy that says legacy code is code without tests. But I think it's also code that you don't understand thoroughly, or that the development team doesn't understand thoroughly, or that has gotten more difficult to maintain. So I think that there's a statistic that something like 75% of all software development happens on applications that are legacy or deal with legacy code.
Can you take me through your thought process when you're confronted with legacy applications? So what am I going to do with this?
Depends on what you want to do with it. I mean, if it's a legacy, but you're not changing it, don't kick the hornet's nest. I mean, if it's working, tested, and you have no problems with it, don't mess with it. Don't go and change the code just for change's sake. Only change the portions that you need to, or that have features or development or something like that. If you do need to make changes to the code base, I think the first step is to make sure you understand it, that the development team understands how it works and how it's developed and how it's architected, designed, but also then put a safety net in place, put tests in place, so that when you do some new development or changes to that code base, you have some sort of way of verifying you haven't broken existing functionality.
And you kind of already talked through some of the pros and cons of what you're going to do with that, but just officially going through what are the pros and cons of refresh versus rewrite versus refactoring.
So there's a lot of different decisions you have to make. First, you need to figure out what kind of problem you're facing. Are you making a change because you're suffering problems around feature development's too slow, or is it a maintenance nightmare, or perhaps maybe your licensing costs have gone up on some third-party library and you want to refactor away from that? There's lots of different drivers for refresh, rewrite, refactor. In the end, I think it comes down to what you're trying to do, and then how much resources you're willing to devote to making that change. And I think that a few things you want to take away from that is try to approach the whole process in an agile fashion, do it incrementally, make a plan, and make sure your team gets some sort of plan together to incrementally move towards resolving the pain you're feeling. I would also, at least from the product owner, product manager point of view, be very wary of a team that says they should fully rewrite things. This is something that can happen. Teams that are brought into a legacy code base, if they don't understand it, there's a temptation to want to, well, that's not the way I would have done it. I want to throw it away and write it clean. And that's a lot of risk. A lot of times there's a lot of business logic or business knowledge baked into a legacy code base that while it's legacy, there's a lot going on there that isn't fully understood or really transparent. And they may think they understand the requirements, but oftentimes there's a lot of stuff in there that is hidden. And so it's a full rewrite can be pretty risky.
What are some ways that you can set up your architecture to make it more adaptive to change?
So a well-architected, a well-designed system is much easier to rewrite or refactor because it's got loose coupling at particular boundaries. Bounded context within our architecture are areas that are natural boundaries, and it's designed so that, say, maybe the UI is more isolated from the middle tier and the back end. And that way, it's easier to swap out different major architectural components. They're not as tightly coupled. So there's a lot of architectural patterns like loose coupling and things like that, and isolation. There's a whole bunch of architectural principles that make refactoring the application easier.
All right, last question. Can an organization successfully transition to Agile without raising the ante for tech?
I think tech practices go hand in hand with moving to Agile. You might can. I think it'd be a lot more difficult. If you're doing poor technical practices and you're trying to transition to Agile, you'll have a lot of trouble. A lot of things will be more difficult. And a lot of the things that Agile wants us to do boil down to being very good at your technical practices, automating things that you haven't automated before, and things like that. So I think it would be very difficult to transition to Agile and not pay attention to solid technical practices.